From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast is Andre Johnson
Jr.
Do not forget the Junior. It's very important to add the Junior on the end of his name. Before we get into today's podcast, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button to get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And we have another episode today on this Wednesday. We'll have an update on this pod coming up a little bit later in the show, but it is Wednesday, late June. Little bit of the downtime when it comes to the football calendar, but nonetheless, how you feeling today?
Feeling good. You know, like you said, not a lot going on in the football world right now, but hey, we got a lot of soccer. We got the NBA draft tonight. We just kind of been surviving off of that.
Yeah, and we're kind of into this little break here, and they'll report at the end of July, and that's when we go all gas, no brakes for like 6 months straight. I don't necessarily complain about this time of year, but you know, sometimes the topics can get a little dry. But we do have a decent topic today. It's stuff we've talked about really in bits and pieces throughout previous podcasts based off things that we have seen and different things we've looked at when it's come to the roster, but we've never had an actual podcast on the specific position battles that are going to come up in training camp when they report to Irvine, California. Again, the first practice is July 24th. So I thought that was a pretty good spot to go with the big picture today. And there's a few. I mean, look, right now I'm doing a Ranking the Saints countdown. If you're watching Fox 8 News at 10, I'm ranking the Saints 1 through 20. Some years going 1 through 20 is very easy because there's very easy to find 20 to 25 guys to put in that list. Sometimes finding 20 players to fill out that list can be a little bit of a challenge. This year, there are a few more question marks on this roster than in previous years. So, yeah, I think this was we're going into an unknown into training camp, into the season. There are a lot of legitimate question marks about this roster, how good they can truly be, and what they're legitimately counting on to take that leap from 9-8 last year to back into the postseason. And we got quite a bit of position battles here. And I think that's kind of a clue in terms of like where this roster currently is. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, the theme of training camp in California is going to be competition. And we've got 5 positions that we've really zeroed in on today where the competition is going to be the fiercest, some for starting positions, some for backup positions. And that's actually where we're going to start because it actually might be the most high-profile battle of training camp despite it being for a backup position, and that's for the backup quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be the one that gets the most attention. I think this is going to be the one, A, you got a new offense, B, you got Jake Haener, who had a really good training camp last year, C, you've got Spencer Rattler, a guy that's got a lot of notoriety as he, has had an interesting journey throughout high school, college, and now obviously in the pros. We saw what happened in OTAs, but this race is far from over. I think it's fair to say, based off what we've seen, that Jake Haener is in the lead right now, but that could certainly change. I mean, Spencer Rattler had just gotten drafted, moved to a new city, and trying to figure things out. And, oh, by the way, learning a new offense. And obviously, Haener went through that last year. And this year, those types of things are out of the way. So I think this is because it's the quarterback position, and it's a couple of guys that I mean, you know these guys. I think this is going to be a battle because you're going to see – we're going to key on this offense throughout training camp. And we're going to obviously look to see how Derek Carr fits into this new offense because he had a really good offseason. So that's going to be on one kind of category. But in the other category, you're going to see, okay, well, who's going to battle for number 2? And – if they keep 3, which they probably will, these 3, that's a lot of youth behind Derek Carr. So I want to see are either one of these guys going to be capable enough to step up to the challenge of being the backup quarterback. Derek Carr got hurt a couple times last year, although he didn't miss a game. He exited the game 3 different times throughout the season. So I think this is going to be one that's going to be fun to watch. And I think this is one where you're not just going to see it in training camp. They're both going to play a ton in the preseason.
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to get a whole lot of football, a whole lot of tape to grade. And that's exactly what you want in a quarterback battle.
Definitely. And what you said last, that's what I'm really zoned in on because I don't think this battle is going to be solved in California at training camp. I think it'll really be solved in the preseason because that's what we saw last year. Last year, if you were at training camp, you saw that Jake Haener was knocking on the door of QB2 back then, and that was with Jameis Winston there. Jake Haener outperformed Jameis Winston when it came to training camp practices, but when they actually got on the field in the preseason, Jameis's veteran instincts kind of shone through, and it showed that Jake Haener really wasn't ready to be the backup quarterback just yet, even though Haener had been better in training camp. So I think you're going to see that this year, Haener versus Rattler, it's going to come down to who can step into the actual games and take those live bullets and shine in those situations.
I think it's totally fair. Because I don't need another practice player. I mean, look, I think Jake Haener's been great in practice. A lot of different practices. But that's the challenge for him. And he knows it. And obviously Spencer Rattler, he's got to get acclimated quickly and see, certainly where he's at, in his development. Because, both those guys have their strengths. Both those guys have some question marks. And both those guys will get a ton of opportunity in the preseason to show what they can do. So that's going to be the highest profile competition battle. But on the surface, it's not, I wouldn't call it the most important competition because it's for the backup job. But we do have another one here that we're going to get to next that I think is going to be one of the most important issues to solve all season.
Right, and this actually might be the most important position battle, and it's probably the one that's going the most under the radar just in terms of national position battles, and that's that battle for left guard along that offensive line. We know the offensive line has been an issue for the Saints all offseason. So far, Nick Saldiveri's been getting the majority of first-team reps throughout this offseason program, but you've got Shane Lemieux and you've got Lucas Patrick behind him.
And you got Ali Udoh as well, who didn't get a whole lot of offseason work. And, I could have just put offensive line here because the challenge in the process of working through to find the best five is something that I think is going to be the probably underlying storyline of camp. That has to come together. So I put left guard, or we talking left guard here because I like Saldiveri. I think he's a guy that can certainly rise to the occasion, but he didn't play at all. 18 snaps a season ago. And he's one of three guys, as I've said many times, that are very, very young on this offensive line that has basically no experience. So, is it too much youth? Even if it's not a Saldiveri thing, it's just they're all too young. We need some veteran leadership there, or just a veteran guy that's been there before, because they have other guys on the tackles, on the edges, that are very, very kind of bare as well in terms of their actual playing experience. So I think that's certainly a competition to watch. In saying that, we also have to confirm that Fuaga and Penning are in the right spots and can hold those spots as well. So yes, it's left guard, but it's left guard within the sea of trying to find the right five guys, which is going to take a while to figure that out. And I do think it's important the Saints need to have no preconceived notions. Do what the tape tells you. What the tape tells you when the pads come on, are these guys ready to step up and be the Saints starting offensive line? Because this offense needs that. And you brought this new coaching staff in, or offensive coaching staff in, to establish that. Very unique run scheme, very unique offensive scheme in terms of passing the ball, play action, all that stuff. So that has to come together. So left guard, yes, but also finding the right five is probably going to be the biggest thing we'll have to figure out by the end of training camp.
Definitely, because if you remember, the biggest surprise of day one of OTAs was that Taluise Fuaga was on the left side, Trevor Penning was on the right side. Everybody kind of assumed it would be flipped because of where the two of them had played for the majority of their careers, collegiate career in Fuaga's case. And I was listening to Cam Newton talk, and he was like, one of the most underrated, but without a doubt the hardest to play position-wise in the NFL, left tackle and right tackle. You've got two guys with basically no experience there, and even behind them, you don't have a lot of NFL experience behind them. Like, this is not an offensive line that has a lot of depth at a lot of those positions.
And look, if it doesn't work out with Penning, it'll be hugely disappointing. We know that, and he would officially fall into the bust category. I think this is probably his last chance.
Yeah.
But let's just say if that were to happen, then who becomes your right tackle? Is it Fuaga? Is it Ali Udoh, who's played some tackle? Is it Landon Young, who's going into his fourth year, but it's always been kind of a reserve guy? Is it like Justin Herron, the guy they signed, the veteran that they signed? And then look, we're all assuming Fuaga is going to be that guy, and I have optimism that he can be that guy, but should he flip back over to the right if that was the case? Is he going to be a guaranteed day one guy where you can count on? There's no dip in production that's going to be costly? I don't know. So I think this is it. I mean, the offensive line continuity and how it ultimately ends up being the best five is probably going to be the most important thing this team figures out in training camp preseason.
Absolutely, because we've talked about how important it's going to be for them to be able to run the ball in this system. Running the ball doesn't start with Alvin Kamara or Kendre Miller or Jamal Williams. It starts with those five guys up front. So we'll definitely be watching them throughout the training camp process. Now, we talked about running the ball. Now let's talk about passing the ball because the next position where you've got a pretty prominent battle is that wide receiver 3 spot because you got a lot of guys mixed in there. You could talk about Cedric Wilson, A.T. Perry, Bub Means, Equanimous St. Brown, a lot of guys mixed in. Who could you see kind of setting themselves apart?
Yeah, I think you've got, you got Olave, you got Shaheed. On paper, that's 1 and 2. Are you confident that could be 1 and 2? Maybe. You're going to roll with that. 3, are we guaranteeing that it's A.T. Perry? Is it Cedric Wilson who's been in this offense and he's a veteran and he's been there and he's done that? I think that's probably a sneakier battle than people realize. A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson, throw Bub Means in there, throw Equimanius St. Brown. And there's also this kind of, you starting to feel it, you kind of hear a little bit discussion, talking point. I don't know if we ever really got a whole lot from the organization about it, but is this a position where they're not done adding? The wide receiver position? I've been asked about this a lot the last couple weeks. Right now, this is what it is, but it's very young. And it's a brand new offensive coaching staff. Do they feel like maybe there's another fit out there that could fit better with this offense and, be the type of receiver? I was asked on a show yesterday, do they have the prototype with this receiver core for this offense? I said, I don't know about size and speed prototype. I do know this. They're going to want someone that specializes in run after the catch. Yep. If they don't feel like they have a guy that can truly run after the catch with competency and be really good at it, like it's one of their best traits, then I could see them perhaps looking around at the wide receiver position around the NFL to see who they could potentially add. But this is always another fun one because follow the ball. And, it's always something to watch when you follow the ball in training camp and obviously preseason. So this number 3, number 4 wide receiver is probably that's one of those battles that I think is going to be a good one in training camp.
Right, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them add to this position because it seems like they really prioritized bringing in size this offseason. A.T. Perry was already a big guy, but Cedric Wilson 6'2". Bub Means, he's 6'1", 6'2". Equanimous St. Brown,
6'5".
he's 6'5". Yeah. So they really focused in on bringing in size because that was something they lacked when they went into the offseason. But now you brought in a lot of size. Outside of Rashid Shaheed, do you have a real burner on this team? A guy who you can trust to turn on the jets and get behind the defense? Because if something does happen to Shaheed, or if Shaheed, for whatever reason, doesn't play at the level that you're hoping for him to do so, there's not a guy behind him who can replicate that.
And I don't know how this happened, but I ended up watching, this is before the Kubiak thing, I ended up watching a lot of 49ers last year. And the way those plays developed and the way those receivers play and run those routes, like there is a way that they play that just it's very unique. Like I said, they catch the ball in space and they go, and that's not by accident. It's designed that way. So do they have that aspect of the game, regardless of who that is? In this current group of wide receivers. So I think it's possible that they add, but I also want to see who can certainly develop and become that fit for this offense. What's next?
Up next, we're going to the defensive side. Another battle that's kind of going under the radar, and that's a battle at linebacker. You've got Pete Werner, who's been the starter the last couple of years, had a good 2022. We both said he kind of took a step back in 23. And then you've got one of the first free agents the Saints signed in Willie Gay Jr.
This is going to be a good one. It's a competition, yes. And if one guy's better, obviously. But I also think these two guys are going to both play a lot.
Yeah.
And I think the addition of Willie Gay with that particular skill set, with that speed, his ability to play against the run, coverage, that type of thing, that is another sort of piece for a defensive game planner, Dennis Allen, who is a masterful defensive game planner when it comes to game planning and defensive play calling. I mean, you can knock DA for a lot, but when it comes to game day defensive matchups and play calling, he is fantastic. So not only is this going to be a competition, but I also am very curious to see how creative they get with using 3 linebackers on the field. Or when you go to third down, they like to use that dime grouping. Is it Werner out, Gay in? Is it when you're a nickel? Is it 3 down linemen, 3 backers, and 5 DBs now, as opposed to the 4-2-5 that they've been running over the last couple seasons? So I just think the addition of Willie Gay unlocks things that we didn't realize needed to be unlocked on this defense. And I think for a guy like Dennis Allen, a very creative mind, a very unique play caller when it comes to certain personnel groupings against certain matchups, I think this is a very good addition. So it's going to be a competition, but I think it's also a creative piece for Dennis Allen.
Right, because Willie Gay fills a need, and you could argue he fills your biggest need on defense, and that's that he specializes in stopping mobile quarterbacks. It's an issue that's been a problem for the Saints for years, but at the same time, Willie Gay probably has the most ground to cover in beating out the guy he's battling compared to the guys we've talked about before. Because right now, there's no defined QB2 for the Saints.
Exactly.
Rattler and Hainer are fighting for that. There's no defined wide receiver 3 for the Saints. There's not even really a defined left guard. It's a lot of new guys who didn't start at that position last year fighting to start at that position this year. Pete Werner's been the starter pretty much every down the last 2 years. So if Willie Gay is going to somehow unseat him for that position, he's really got to outperform him in the next month or two.
Yeah, and that's why, like, I think it would have to take a really big step down for Werner. Even like his little small dip last year, but it would have to go lower than that for him to truly get unseated for that job. That's why I think this is more of a combination as opposed to a competition, because I really think you can do a lot with these type of backers and that creative defensive mind. I think you can do a lot with a guy like, with Werner and Willie Gay. So I'm very curious to see what happens. So definitely looking forward to that one. What's next?
Up next, we've got the nickel cornerback battle, another one that I believe is going to be pretty high profile going into camp, because you've got Alontae Taylor and you've got the guy the Saints traded up in the second round of draft in Kool-Aid McKinstry, who I can see easily becoming a fan favorite here in New Orleans.
Yeah, big personality, no doubt about it. But I still got to see him on the field. We haven't seen him on the field yet. Yeah. He's been, slowly working his way back with was it a foot issue that was discovered at a pro day or combine, something like that, in the pre-draft process. So he was still able to run a 40 time, a respectable 40 time with that injury. So yeah, I think this is going to be a battle. I think right now it is Alontae Taylor's job. I think he would be the favorite to take this job, just because of how acclimated Kool-Aid's going to have to get just to get back in football shape, catch up where they're at with the in the system, that sort of thing. I think this is probably going to be something where, if there's no injury involved, and obviously no one wants that, where as the season goes on and there's struggles, perhaps Kool-Aid could be the one to step in at that point, because we saw what happened with Alontae Taylor last year when it came to a couple situations where he got pulled out of the game. But right now, although I do like this battle, I think it's going to be a good competition, because I know Kool-Aid McKinstry's got an incredible football IQ. I think it's fair to say Alontae Taylor is in the lead for this position, but it's not a guarantee. So I think they'll go into it with him kind of in first place or kind of in the lead, but I do think it's going to be a genuine competition.
Right, and Alontae Taylor, if I remember correctly, I think on 2 separate occasions this offseason, Dennis Allen has kind of gone out of his way to really defend Alontae Taylor's play from last season and say, like, hey, cut him some slack. He was a young player learning a new position in that nickel, so, we expect him to be better this year. And Kool-Aid McKinstry, he's also a guy who's going to be in that same position that Alontae was last season. And, I talked to Kool-Aid. He talked about how comfortable he is playing inside and outside, because that's what that Alabama system and Nick Saban prepared him for. But at Alabama, he did for the majority of time play on the outside. So just like we can say, oh, yeah, last year Alontae Taylor was a young guy going into the nickel somewhere he's never been, and he really had to adjust to that, and that took time. As ready as you think you are, you're still going to be, if you're Kool-Aid McKinstry, a young guy going into the nickel, and there's going to be a growth and learning process, and you might take a few lumps there.
Yeah. And I remember, like, when you talked to Kool-Aid, how he said he feels confident playing inside or outside. I remember talking to Alontae and how he was it was the exact opposite, how he was pretty open about, I'm much more natural on the outside. It's a little bit more of a challenge working on the inside. And he was pretty open about how he's got to get better working on the inside because he had played nothing but the outside at Tennessee. So it really is. It's about how quick is Kool-Aid McKinstry's learning curve, and can he learn quick enough to get on the field to beat out a player that's played a lot of football last couple of seasons. And he was another second-round pick as well, Alontae Taylor, at the same position. So that's going to be a good battle to watch training camp, preseason, and also just kind of keep your eye on it when the regular season hits, because I do think that's something that could develop at some point in the season.
Definitely, and by the way, as we go forward with the next 2-3 weeks, watch Fox 8 at 10 o'clock, because Sean mentioned it earlier in this podcast. He is doing the Ranking the Saints countdown, ranking every Saint, starting at number 20, going all the way down to 1. Number 20 was Kendre Miller. Number 19 was Colin Saunders. We'll find out, recording this at about 6 o'clock, we'll find out in about 4.5 hours who number 18 is. But I think this is kind of one of the more fun parts of your offseason.
Yeah, I kind of do it. Like I said, I do that, the kind of ranking the roster. It's generally something that I save as we get closer into this little gap here. Some years the roster's loaded and you feel bad about leaving some players off. Sometimes you're like, is there enough guys to fill out 20, like I said earlier? And we had some discussions in the sports office about, do we have enough to fill it out? And that's just because there's a lot of unknowns on this team right now, and I think that's totally fair. So stay tuned for that. A couple honorable mentions from a competition standpoint at safety. Next to Matthew, is it Jordan Howden? Is it Jonathan Abram? Do they add a player there? And then, of course, we got to go specialist. Kicker, Blake Grupe, Charlie Smith, and then punter, Lou Headley, Matthew Hayball. So I do think those are some competitions. And also this RB2, running back 2, Kendre Miller versus Jamal Williams, I think is going to be a battle to watch, because I think the Saints want Kendre to win that job, but he'll have to win it through a genuine competition.
And also, you could even, I don't know if it's as much of a battle, because at the tight end position, I think Foster Moreau, assuming Jawan Johnson is unable to go for the next month or so, Foster Moreau has a firm hold of that number 1 spot. But Dallin Holker, the way he did perform in OTAs and minicamp, if he goes to training camp, he puts those pads on and he shows that he can still be physical while being the playmaker that we've seen him be in college with the ball in his hands. There's an opportunity for Dallin Holker to really earn some snaps at tight end as a pass catcher.
I have never felt more confident in an UDFA making the roster than I ever. And this is back in the Peyton years too, when undrafted free agents always made the roster. Then I feel about Dallin Holker making the team, both as a football player, but also they got nobody else. They don't have anybody else. Not just make the team, but probably contribute pretty quickly in this offense. All right, real quick before we get out of here, just a quick little announcement. Like I said, we're getting into the break here, so he and I are both going to go on our July vacations. I know you've got one coming up in a couple of weeks. I take the 2 weeks off leading up to training camp. So this will probably be our last pod before we reconvene July 23rd or July 24th for the start of training camp. I will be in California. We'll figure out some of the logistics, but if there is a big enough topic where we have to jump in to do an emergency podcast, we certainly will do that. But given the vacation lineup coming up, given where we're at in the football calendar, this probably will be our last one before we reconvene and come back for training camp. So if that is indeed the case, y'all rest up, get ready, go to the beach, go do whatever you have to do to get yourself ready and rested, relaxed, and refreshed for the 2024 football season up ahead. It should be a wild one, as it always is.
Definitely. I mean, I'm excited. I started doing the podcast in January, so right after the season. Yeah. So I haven't even gotten to do a post-Saints game podcast yet, and I feel like that's when these things really get fun.
That's going to get fun, and remember, when we get to training camp, just those practices are closed, so I will be a lot of your eyes out there. So just be sure to tune in to those podcasts when we pick it back up. All right, so we'll meet up in a couple of weeks. So Andre Johnson Jr., you got anything else?
Nope, I'm good. I'll catch y'all after I go to the beach.
All right, he's going to the beach. I'm going to the beach. Take some time off, some resting, relaxation. So we'll catch you guys in a couple of weeks. So for Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.